This webinar is going to be recorded. I just want to give you a heads up that we will be making the Flash file available after the event for people to view or listen back to any components. So that's why we're excited that the recording is there. Susan, you want to take it away?
Certainly, yeah. Thanks, Sherry. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Susan Musante, and I'm the Education Program Manager at the American Institute of Biological Sciences. And I'm really pleased that you all are joining us for the second webinar in a new series that we're offering specifically for the Introductory Biology education group. The series offered by, as you see there, the four logos on your screen, the IBP, which stands for Introductory Biology Project, which is a networking project funded by the National Science Foundation, the National Association of Biology Teachers, AIBS, and the University of California Museum of Paleontology. And these four partners came together because we have a common goal to support the community of educators teaching introductory biology. And the webinar idea came from a series of conversations that took place at the 2009 NEBT Professional Development Conference. During that conference, we spoke to approximately 70 faculty at a range of institutions about students' perceptions of biology, faculty course goals, institutional course goals. And we heard faculty say during those conversations that we could help, one way we could help, these organizations and projects could help, is by providing professional development opportunities that model different ways of teaching, share good questions that could be used, share a changed approach to teaching science as a process, provide some practical and accessible resources, some opportunities to practice those resources, using those resources, provide incentives, include long-term support, and also include follow-up to assess, help people implementing the resources assess their impact. So therefore, each webinar in the series is going to offer you some information about a teaching resource or a pedagogical technique, and provide also the opportunity to interact with the resource providers and each other. So that's the overall goals of the webinar, and we've got a number of other ones I just want to touch on and let you know that are coming up. So in 2010, we're going to have this one in February, and then in March we have one on using issues to teach biology, and that's going to be on Thursday, March 25th in the afternoon. Later in April, we're going to have one on cyber learning and electronic resources, and then in May we're going to have one on using the concept inventory of natural selection. We'll take June and July off for a little summer break, and then be back in August with understanding evolution. So that's the overview of what the webinar series is all about and what you can expect to come up in the future. And Sherry, I think that's all I've got for now.
Sure. So as Susan mentioned, this webinar is one that's part of a series, and we really want it to be an opportunity for you to interact with peers about ways to improve your teaching in introductory biology. One more note about our 2010 webinar series is that we had an outstanding webinar in January about process and nature science in teaching biology. That webinar will be available for archive viewing today. At the end of this presentation, we're going to show you how to get to the IBP discussion boards where you guys can continue the dialogue from the presentation today. And the link from last month's archive as well as today's event will be available there for your free viewing. So we'll hope you'll take advantage of that and gain the knowledge from that presentation as well. So my role here is just to bring you some logistical information with this webinar to help you feel comfortable with the tools that will allow you to engage and interact with our wonderful presenter, Eric. There's two ways to communicate. One of them is via the chat server. And just to test it out and make sure you guys are comfortable with using it, we ask that each of you please go to the chat now and type in the city and state from which you are calling today. This is great. We've got folks from all over: New York, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Iowa, Texas. Oh, we've got someone from Mexico. That's fantastic. Madison, Wisconsin, Cincinnati, Ohio, Knoxville, Tennessee. Great. As I mentioned, there's two mechanisms for communicating with the presenter. One of them is through that chat server. Now that you're all well trained, I know that you'll be actively participating in this event today. The second is through unmuting your phone to ask your question. So at various points throughout the presentation, the presenter and I will encourage you to share your thoughts or ideas with us with respect to the presentation. At that time, I will inform you that to unmute your phone, you will press *7, and we'll have you raise your hand by pushing that raise hand button, and then I'll call on you to be able to speak your question. So thank you. I think you're really going to enjoy the presentation today. Eric has some great images and some great points to make in his slides. And with that, I would like to hand it over to you, Eric. Welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Okay. Well, welcome, everybody. And I have to tell you that I found out that we have somebody coming in from the first college that I went back to. My first attempt at college, I screwed up. I flunked out. I worked in paper mills. And then I went back to University of Wisconsin, Fox Valley Community College. And Dr. Perry, I understand you're on with us. And I just wanted to say thank you to UW Fox Valley and all of the other people who've been involved in helping me get to where I'm at. Okay, what we're going to do today is talk about using cases and especially how to get serious about using cases. So I'm not so much going to be trying to give you a spiel about why cases are important, but I want to talk about how to get cases more involved in your class. And to do that, I want to really emphasize 3 points. First of all, what is it that you really want to teach your students? Because I think many of us, at least it's true for me, didn't teach my students what I wanted them to learn. Secondly, how to look at your syllabus and pull it apart and start to reshape it so that you do a better job of the first goal. And then third, I want to share with you a number of things that I've done wrong and hopefully help you avoid some of those. First, let me tell you just a little bit about me. I'm a plant ecologist. I'm also a pretty big guy. You can't see it in this picture, but I'm 6.5 feet tall. I have 2 daughters. It's hard to believe that one is 14 now, and I have to tell you a very tragic event happened in my life last week. My older daughter told me that she was planning to take a boy to a dance.
That's terrible.
I was prepared for that in maybe another 10 years, but anyhow. I started teaching back in 1995, and as with many of us, I went to a research institution that said teaching wasn't really important, but I wanted to be a good teacher. And my plan was that if I just worked hard enough at teaching, that this is what would happen when I walked down the hall. The students would respond, people would think I was doing a great job, and some real learning would take place. And I did my best, and I tried, and I found that in reality, it was more like this. And even worse, the students didn't particularly want to get across the grade. They were happy to fall in right away. Education is sort of the one commodity that the less you give the customer for the dollar, the happier they are. And within this context of me finding that I really wasn't achieving my objectives and that I wasn't that great at teaching after all, I learned about an opportunity to participate in the Buffalo case collection workshop. And I thought, hey, free trip to Buffalo for a week? Something that makes my dean think that I'm actually doing something? And maybe I'll learn something from it. Why not? And I had no idea that what I was going to get into was something that would really change my outlook on teaching. But I went to the Buffalo collection and ended up developing this case, my first case, about a deer herd. It was great fun. My students loved it. I loved it. I believe the stuff that I was hearing about why cases were important, that students shifting them to active learning, that they retain information better, so forth. But then I realized maybe there was more to teaching than just using a case here or there. And here are my thoughts. I was thinking of science as sort of like about a bicycle. And if biology was bicycles, in a conventional collegiate biology program, we would talk about how bicycles work. You'd take them apart. You'd watch videos. Let the students go for a ride around the block, and then tell them, okay, go out and win the Tour de France. In other words, I don't think that we really teach the things that we want our students to learn. And so while we think that our students are going to be going out and doing this kind of stuff, what I've found happens all too often when I talk to my students coming back and so forth is this. And that's not good for the student. It's not good for our profession. It's not good for what we want to do. This is not the result that we intend. And I thought about that and said to myself, am I still doing that? Now, I knew the arguments for cases. You probably know these as well, that cases shift students to be more active learners, that they may not learn as much information right up front, but that they retain that information far better so that 6 months down the road, they really know quite a bit more. And in particular, that cases tend to give our students practice with the skills of doing science, thinking through problems, finding reasons, finding what they want to do, building arguments. And I was using 2 cases, 3 cases a semester. Was that enough? Was that really what I wanted to do? So I'd like to, Sherry, you're going to have to help me out with this one. I want people to give me some feedback. How many cases, or let's say how many hours of cases, if you teach a case over multiple periods, do you teach in your class over the semester? And by the way, I understand that some of you are from a high school background. We have a lot of people from a community college background. Some people even teaching things like advanced pharmacology and so forth. But whatever level you're teaching at, how much do you use cases for? Please put that in.
If you could please note in the chat how many cases you're using. Eric, we're already starting to get some responses.
See that?
About 3 cases. 1, 3, 2, 3, 1 to 2. Oh, up to 8. 4 cases, 1 per lecture day, an hour a week.
80%. Wow.
Wow.
You should be doing this one, not me.
5 cases, but they're short. None so far. From 6 to 24. Wow. 15 cases a semester. 8, 6.
So some of you are already very serious about this, and I'd love to hear more from you about how you do this. Some of you are just beginning to get your feet wet in this, and some of you are using them at about the level that I was using them. 3 a semester or something like that. Now, let me ask a follow-up question. What do you think your cases do for your students? What are your specific goals for the cases?
If any of you'd like to unmute your phone and comment through the phone system, that would be great. Just raise your hand with your chat server. If you're not comfortable with unmuting your phone, you're welcome to chat in your comment, and I'd be happy to read it for you.
What do they have to do to unmute their phone?
They raise their hand, and then I'll give instructions so that we all don't unmute at the same time. Okay, Deborah, would you mind dialing *7 to unmute your phone and share your comments?
You want me to speak now?
Yeah, go for it.
It does many things.
Can you be a little louder?
It does. Sorry, I'm just getting over being sick. I'm speaking about as loud as I can.
Yep.
But it does many things. One of the things I've discovered is students think they know a lot, but then when they try to verbalize it with each other or with the rest of the class, they discover they really don't understand it. And so with cases, we do a lot of in-class discussion of the case, and we actually work them in the classroom. Not every time, because we just have so much content to cover. But that's one of the things that I have discovered. And it also is very, very good at problem solving and working in groups.
Anybody else?
See, we have lots of comments coming in through the chat, and Monica has raised her hand to share her thoughts. Deborah, if you want to dial *6, you'll be muted again. And Monica, if you want to dial *7, you'll be unmuted.
Yes. Hello, is this me?
Mm-hmm.
Hello. Hi, Monica.
I've been using cases for the first time during last semester and this one, and I teach anatomy and physiology. So I found that my students, instead of me giving a lecture every time when they have a case, they feel more like doctors, and they're looking for the information themselves and trying to solve the problem that the case studies I've used always deal with a disease that someone has.
Monica, would you mind sharing with us what level of student you are teaching?
This is high school, third year in high school.
Great.
Seniors, yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing. We have quite a few comments in the chat, Eric, so I'm just going to read a handful of these.
Okay.
Let's see. Elaine says that cases are useful in integrating basic information, problem solving, and thinking. Kevin says they can apply the principles rather than just parrot them back. Let's see. Camelia says it helps to synthesize material. Chris says to model the thought process of a scientist. Critical thinking. Kevin says they're useful in helping to expose misconceptions. Elaine says our students are introduced to NCBIs, and my chat window just closed.
One of the things that I'm seeing as repeated themes here, real-life examples, problem solving, focus on the bigger picture, critical thinking, synthesize material. Those are sort of recurring themes or patterns that I'm picking out here.
Great. Cindy Miller, would you like to unmute your phone by dialing *7 to add any additional comments to that? *7 to unmute. Okay. James Murphy, would you like to add any comments?
Is it unmuted? Yeah. This is Monroe Community College, and we use cases quite extensively in our microbiology course that is aimed at allied health students. Not only does it help them to see the process of having a sick patient and trying to follow up on what is causing the infection, but we use it to really connect the lab to the process. So they actually work through the case, and then they do lab activities that are coordinated with the case.
Great.
By the way, Altagracia, I see that you've just joined us. It is being recorded, so you will be able to access everything later.
Great.
Okay,
Eric,
so if your goals for cases are that they help your students learn some of these bigger picture issues, and those are my goals, here's what I found. Excuse me for my voice. My syllabus was getting too big already. Cases take more time. How on earth was I supposed to fit cases in, especially if I thought that I really should do more? 8 cases. I see some of you do 80% cases. How was I going to handle that? You should have access to an example syllabus that's called Biology 102. It's not necessarily a good or a bad syllabus. It's just an example that I found on the web. And use your chat, or if you want to unmute your phone and do that option, fine. But tell me what you see about this class.
Deborah, if you'd like to unmute your phone by dialing *7, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not seeing the syllabus.
Okay.
I've never done this before, so.
Oh, that's totally fine. I think the syllabus was sent out by email beforehand.
Oh, well, apparently I missed it, but I've been sick for a week, so that could explain it.
Well,
if you want to go ahead and put your email address.
Sorry, I did get several emails from you, but I did not receive that one. I apologize.
If you'd like to put your email in the chat, we'll go ahead and send you a copy of that syllabus right now. If anyone else is missing the syllabus, then go ahead and put your email in the chat as well, and we'll send out an email right now so everyone has it in hand.
I'm seeing comments that say things like, only evaluation is by exam, seems punitive, covers a lot of material, content-rich, probably more surface learning than in-depth. Doesn't sound interesting. Camelia, what do you mean by office hours unfriendly?
Amelia, to unmute your phone, you could dial *7, or if you'd like to post your comment in the chat, that's fine as well.
Office hours held in hallway. Yeah, that was an interesting point, wasn't it? Now, I can kind of understand having to meet out in the hall under some situations. I went to a college, for example, when the faculty were so desperate to avoid having to share an office that they designed the offices so small that the only place a student could sit was in the hall. But you're right, this syllabus does not come across as particularly friendly. It does not come across as having, oh boy, just a lot of different concepts and so forth. What are the goals for this course?
Goals aren't clearly defined. No idea what the goals are. Who knows?
What's going to happen November 3rd?
Reproduction.
Yeah. What about reproduction?
We're going to reproduce.
Someone wants to know if they're having sex in class.
Looks good to me.
I'm getting a sense that it's Friday afternoon from some of these responses.
Sorry.
Okay, well, here's what I was seeing when I looked at it. First of all, I didn't see any goals. And secondly, you're right, reproduction, but what about it? What are they going to do? What do you think? Should goals be stated?
Yes.
They're required to be one.
Of course.
Ours are required.
Yes, I understand that. In my school, too, some expect something along those lines. How about goals for every day? Should you have goals for a single class period?
We've got a yes?
Well, I think certainly at the level of introductory biology, that would be very good at helping direct the students in what they're supposed to be learning.
But the question is, I'm sorry, I thought you were finished.
I apologize.
No, that's my fault. I'm just wondering if that needs to be in the syllabus.
That's a good question. The daily goals, you mean?
Yeah.
Or the overall goals?
Daily goals. Since the syllabus really is a contract that you're expected to stick to.
What do you think? Should the daily goals be included in the syllabus?
I'd like more flexibility than that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you think they should be stated at all then? And how would you do it then?
It seems like stating the daily goals is really more for the professor than it is for the students. I mean, reality is, are they really going to pay attention to them? And if you're teaching well, then the goals are implicit in what you're teaching, right?
Okay, that's we'll see what we can say about that. I'm interested in that later. I'd like you to just think about a typical introductory bio course for majors. Now, I'm obviously thinking at a college level. Those of you who are teaching at a high school level, think about an intro course for, your freshmen or whatever level they are. What do you think the overall course goals should be, and which one is most important to you?
Can you restate that question, Eric?
Sure. Which goal do you think is the most important goal for an introductory biology course?
I want to give them a foundation on which I and my colleagues can build in their upper level classes.
Now, that foundation in what? Foundation in knowledge? Foundation in skills?
Yes. All of the above. I want them to begin to think like scientists, yet reality is there's some content that they need to know. They need to know what a cell is. They need to know what mitochondria are. There is content that is valid, that to expect that they would know in future classes.
And I'm seeing similar comments from those of you who are using the chat function. Learning critical thinking, learning some basic biology content. And one of the main things that I'm trying to point out to you is most of us have as a very important goal not just information, but what do you do with it? How do you think as a scientist? How do you build scientific ideas? How do you problem solve? Is a goal that I'm seeing popping up repeatedly here, and not just handing out flashcards of information. So go back to that example syllabus that you're looking at. We just said that one of our goals is to have students develop critical thinking. Do you think that's going to happen in this class, and where?
I think it might happen in the class. I think that the syllabus is so brief, we're not going to see it from the syllabus. But, I mean, you know, whoever wrote the syllabus, I don't want to be overcritical of them, because I don't think we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's not going to happen in this class. It's certainly not reflected in the syllabus, which is the only snapshot we have.
Yep, I agree with that. Now, just looking at the syllabus, for example, I see one day, there are a couple of days here in which they're planning to cover 2 chapters. Virtually every day is covering a half a chapter to a chapter. Do you think that that's going to work with the goal to do critical thinking and problem solving?
Well, not if you're getting across. Oh.
I'm sorry. Somebody say something like
if you want to get across a great deal of content,
yeah,
it depends on how much you expect from the students. If they're supposed to be prepared and they learn their material, they read it beforehand, of course, in an introductory biology, which I only teach once in the summer. I teach higher level. But in any case, they do have to have the contract of being able to be prepared for the class, in which case, you know, getting across the content may take a little bit less time, and you perhaps could teach it in the form of case studies. That's what I feel. I feel, you know, my higher level classes know the content.
Alert from backup failed.
I'm not sure in introductory biology that you can really expect them to understand all these very complex, difficult concepts without having you go over the content with them.
Well, and certainly we have a big problem here that these are, you know, which comes first? And the answer is neither. You need to both be teaching information and be teaching problem solving. And I think one of the problems that too many of my colleagues do is they think that the introductory courses should be information design. Those of you who are teaching a more advanced class, do you feel that the students coming into your class are adequately prepared?
I think, Eric, we'd like to hear some opinions from others, so we're going to go back to the hand-raising mechanism. Is there someone who'd like to raise their hand to comment? Anne-Marie, would you like to dial *7 to share your comments? Anne-Marie? Okay, Deborah, you're also raising your hand. Could you go ahead and dial *7 to share your comments?
Yeah, I don't think I'm very good at this because I've been talking. In any case, at the higher level, yes, they are definitely more prepared than what I've seen in the introductory biology class. And they are willing to do more, and they're open to doing case studies. They're open to reading papers and writing about them. Right. So yes, I would say they're definitely better prepared.
Better prepared, but are they?
Yes.
Do you think that they know the material adequately that you would expect them to have from the intro course?
Some of them do, and maybe those are the A and B students. But in some of the classes that I teach, I'm able to cover using case studies. instead of just giving them a formal lecture, which I have to say I usually do give formal lectures, but there are some concepts that we can cover just with a case study. And I don't think I could do that in an introductory biology class. And that's why I'm taking this class.
No, I understand. And my reaction going through all of this is I want my students to learn information. I want them to retain the information. And I also want them to learn problem-solving skills and critical thinking skills. Anyone else want to raise their hand and say something?
We've got 3 more people who've raised their hands, so I'm going to call on you by name to unmute your phone. Anne-Marie, can you dial *7 to share your thoughts?
Hi. Thanks. I'm sorry I'm joining this late, but I teach both majors and a non-majors introductory biology course, and I guess I'm kind of lucky. I'm sort of in the beginning of my career, and I didn't really, I didn't learn a way not to do it. So I use a lot of case studies, and what I have found is that I can teach an awful lot of both content and process, like process of science, process of problem solving, with really well-chosen cases, and the objectives, as long as the objectives of the case and of learning match up, then students typically get a much richer experience, but with a well-chosen case. And they remember these. I just got an email from a guy who he was in one of my introductory courses 4 years ago. He's applying to med school, and he still remembers one of the cases that we did in introductory biology.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing, Anne-Marie. You can dial *6 to mute your phone again. We have another question. Do we have time, Eric? Would you like another question?
Let's have at least one more person.
Okay, it's Cindy. You could dial *7, Cindy Beals. That'd be great.
Hello. I'm calling because I teach AP biology in high school, and I'm curious if there are others on this that are also in that situation, because we are very sort of hand-tied to a huge amount of curriculum to cover, and this is why I'm taking this webinar. I love the idea of case studies, but I have to stay on such a time frame, such a tight time frame, in order to cover everything, in order to prepare them for the national exam. So I'm interested in hearing if others are sort of in that same boat.
Let me just jump in here briefly. My contention is that it is not that we are thinking, oh, we'd like to do case studies and they're fun and they push this other stuff, but the students learn less. Because the evidence is very clear. They come away 6 months down the road learning a lot more. But you are correct. One of the issues here is trying to fit in cases, and I'm just going to jump to screen number 22 here. Here's my conclusion, looking at my old syllabus. I decided that cases are important, but there's just no room. And you are correct. You have the colleagues who expect, well, you better teach about how things cross membranes for my cell biology class, or whatever. More specifically, you better teach about such and such a protein. We have departmental goals and university expectations. My university thinks that every class should have writing in it, for example. And I agree with them. That's a great thing that we should be doing. But the problem is that we're running out of room. And so one of the things that I want you to think about is aligning your syllabus with your course goals. In other words, if your goal is really to have your students develop the skills of critical thinking and problem solving, then you need to spend some serious amounts of time in your class on that goal. And yes, that means you need to restructure your other goals and perhaps not cover some contents or shift the student learning from that away from a lecture to a case, or shift it to expecting the students to learn things out of class period. I'd like you to look at the other material I sent, the example botany syllabus. Now, I have to apologize because I just grabbed this one from my class list, so I'm a little biased. I'm not including it as an example of a really good syllabus, although I think it's better than the other example that you looked at. But what are the course goals for this botany syllabus? Pamela has a good question. Pamela, I'm just going to pick up and jump onto your comment a little bit. You said something about students are not well prepared to integrate the information, and I would argue that's exactly what a bunch of cases will do, is encourage the development of those kind of teaching skills. All right, comments on the botany syllabus included. Kevin, you obviously it's Friday afternoon. Betty says goals written in a friendly style. Is that important? Anyone want to say something?
If we raise our hand, do we need to wait to be called? I came in late, so I don't know the rules of the conference. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Anne-Marie. Would you like to dial *7 and share your comments? Susan, you'll be next.
So I have a question about, I like the goals as they're stated because they're flexible and because they emphasize to me the outcomes, learn how plants are constructed, some of their most important tasks, without being too bogged down at the early stage in the nitty-gritty details, like a checklist to list off. But my question is, how do we integrate our courses among one another in the same department, so that if I teach a course based on course goals like this, how do I tell my colleagues, you can count on students coming out of my class having learned this, this, and this?
That's a good question, and I have had colleagues say to me, I'm really frustrated because when I get our students in my molecular biology class, they don't really understand what DNA is, or some other example. And I don't see how they're going to get that if you're going to be somewhat reducing the amount of factual knowledge that they're going to be getting from you. And my answer is, do they know it now? And they say, well, no, but they should. And my reply is, exactly. I think they're going to know it better with my approach than the conventional approach. And to some extent, you can't redesign the entire biology department. You have to do things just in accordance with what you're going to do. And it is very important that your outcomes be the ones that the department really wants. If they really want students to be able to think and to know stuff, I would argue that cases will get them further along that line than anyone else. But comments to some of the rest of you about that?
Susan had raised her hand as well. Susan, do you want to share a comment?
I think my comment was relevant a few comments ago, so I don't want to drag the conversation backwards. So that's fine.
Okay. Would anyone else like to raise their hand and share a comment? Kevin, would you like to dial *7 to unmute your phone? Kevin? Usually *7. All right, Eric, do you want to go ahead and move forward or share some of the comments?
Okay, sure. Well, these are the three. Go ahead.
Oh, you can hear me?
Yes.
Oh, this is Chris. So, I was looking at this syllabus. I teach a general introductory genetics course at Madison. And one thing when I do the case studies, I always find I get so far behind because the students start talking a lot more. And the first syllabus is so linear, and, there's expectations for every lecture. And what I like about this syllabus is that there are no expectations, so it gives you a lot of room to maneuver and respond to the students' questions and needs. And they're never looking and saying, but now we're 3 lectures behind, we're 4 lectures behind. And they do tend to get a little panicky when they see they're behind, even though it's probably not that important. So I think that's one thing I find which is actually good in the way you've done the syllabus. With regard to the understanding, are they ready for the higher level? In my experience, when you do the very linear lecture style, they memorize and then they do a brain dump. So they might know it for your exam, but when they get to the next level, they've forgotten it all.
Yep,
and I think case studies, they get them to think about it a little bit more deeply in a way that they grasp the concept such that they tend to, it's harder for them to lose the knowledge, basically. Anyway, I guess that's really all I wanted to kind of say and contribute here.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think that another big piece of this, which I'm hoping to comment on a little bit later, is carefully picking cases. You need to think about your goals for the entire class, goals for each specific piece component of it. And if your cases meet those goals, one of the things that I've had to learn is that just because I talk about it in class doesn't mean that my students know it. And I encourage you, as you think about an hour or whatever unit you want to think about, boil that down to just 1 or 2 or 3 pieces of stuff that you want your students to come away with it. I'm going to jump ahead to this next slide here. And I'm curious what you all think about writing goals for one class period. Would you tell your students what your goals are for, I'm going to be teaching a class, for example, in about 90 minutes, 80 minutes. Should I tell my students the goals that I have for this afternoon? Should I have goals for this afternoon? Go ahead and put in some chat answers, or else if you want to say something, indicate, raise your hand. I see some of the yeses.
Melissa, would you like to dial *7 to unmute your phone?
Hello.
Yep.
Yeah. I set goals for my class periods, and sometimes I share them with the students, sometimes I don't. I want the students to realize that these are goals, but that's not all they're supposed to be learning for that period sometimes, that sometimes there might be a little bit more information that we get a little bit further along in and things like that. So it really depends on the class I'm teaching on whether I share the goals or not.
When I started teaching, I would have said no, that I want my students to know everything, that they should be able to look at stuff and figure out what are the important pieces. And, if somebody said, what do you want me to know out of this? I hate that question. I would have said, well, everything. And I still think everything. But one of the things that I'm learning, and this is perhaps especially true for where I'm at. I'm teaching at a second-tier state school. My students are eager to learn. They're often as clumsy as 8-week-old puppy dogs. They don't know how to look at a class and say, what is it that's important? What are we trying to do here? Why are we trying to do it? And I think that a big piece of both teaching in general and then specifically teaching with cases is that you need to teach your students what you're trying to do, what you expect from them, and how you expect them to be able to do it. Anybody here who thinks that goals should not be shared?
Cindy, I see you've raised your hand. If you'd like to comment at this point, it's *7, but if you're for the last question, just
Hi, I'm not sure it's relevant.
Go for it.
My question is that the students have expectations of being provided with material ahead of time. For instance, lecture notes or PowerPoints. And I do set goals for every class, and I do tell them to them, but I don't say them. I don't write them down.
Mm-hmm.
So my question really is do you give them the goals ahead of time? Would that replace these PowerPoints or lecture notes that I'm always posting?
Well, if you're asking what I do personally, the answer is I begin each class with I use PowerPoints a lot, and I'm teaching big classes. I've got 110 students in one class and 50 some in the other right now. And yes, I do most of the cases. I begin with a slide that says learning objectives. Today, I expect that you're going to come away knowing, well, for example, today, what are chromosomes made of? How does replication work and what are the enzymes? And then finally, STRs and some of the gel electrophoresis stuff. I'm a big believer in sharing those with my students. I also do put together PowerPoints, and because they keep clamoring for them, study guides. I post those afterwards, mostly because I don't want them to be, I'm using clicker questions a lot, and I don't want them to see the question and the answer, or else that kind of destroys the whole point of it. There was a time when I would have said that that's not a good idea, and the reason I would have said is because students tend to think they don't have to come to class. I require attendance, and if you miss class, you get a writing assignment, and the writing assignment is what do we do in class that day. And it's just obnoxious enough that my students really come to class if they can. I'm going to jump ahead in the interest of time here to this next question here. We've been talking a little bit about goals, and I'm arguing that your daily goals need to be related to your course goals, and that your goals should include not just information, but science is a way of thinking, a way of exploring, a way of working through problems. And I believe that cases make sense for this, but only if you use lots of them. Now, what I'd like to do is jump ahead just a little bit into some of the challenges and problems that I see, share some of that with you, and then maybe we can have a little more time for discussion. And I'm likely to ask people to jump into this. The first challenge, which is one both from me and from my colleagues, why are you teaching with cases? If you don't know, then why are you doing it? Secondly, why are you teaching this particular case? Does it meet your goals? And I'm embarrassed to admit that I used to pick cases mostly because they were kind of fun to me. And I didn't necessarily think about how they fit with the pedagogical goals. And a good example is my deer herd case. The first case that I wrote, it's a great case. The students love it. It's fun to teach. But it doesn't directly tie into a lot of the information that I wanted them to be able to get. Second big challenge. Students know how to do lectures. They don't like them, but they understand them. And they're adapted to figuring out how lectures work. You come into class, you sit there, you try to write down the notes, you try not to zone out too much, or if you do, you sit in the back of the room so the professor doesn't say anything. And then you cram the night before the exam, and you're pretty much there. My students think that science should be reduced to flashcards. And a piece of using cases is you need to teach them how to handle the cases. In my classes, for example, I use a lot of small group work, informal groups. And the first couple of weeks of class, I have to sort of wander around and say, what group are you in, bud? You're not in the group? Okay, you got to get in the group. And in fact, I have them hand in some assignments, and if they don't have somebody else's name on the assignment, they don't get a grade for it. So you need to be a little bit of a risk taker and break out of our conventional lecture mode. And I think that is harder than we typically expect. A case is nothing more than a story that sets up a problem to be solved. But it was interesting. I've just been involved for the last couple of years in an NSF-funded project. One of the things we've been doing is writing clicker cases, and they're starting to get published on the Buffalo website right now. I edited all of those cases, so I've read an enormous amount of paperwork over the last 3 years. And my colleagues, good people who wanted to use cases, were committed to the idea of cases, still wanted to write a story in which they set up a problem, then abandon it to do 40 minutes of lecture, and then jump back in at the end to the problem a little bit again. A case is a sort of turning things on its head. Secondly, my colleagues are a big challenge. We've already talked about you're not teaching my concept. I'm sure that some of you are sitting here thinking my syllabus is already too full. How can I add more cases to it? I've had people say things like, your students are having fun. They can't be learning. I had a colleague last week say, I walked by your classroom and it was so noisy. Did you lose control? What happened? And I said, I had 110 students arguing about biology. And he just looked at me as if I was from a different planet. How much would you pay to have all of your students arguing about a biology topic or whatever you're teaching? I know we have somebody here who teaches policy, for example. Assessment of cases is a huge issue and one that we probably should do an entirely separate webinar on. But it requires a different way of thinking. Another big set of problems are my students. Here are some comments that I've gotten. Why do I have to work with this group? I'm better. And it's sort of like Garrison Keillor. If your students are like my students, they all think that they're better than average. And I have to begin my class, and when I start out, I talk about group work, and I tell them that there is good research evidence that shows that people learn better from hearing it from other students than from the professor, that the good students still learn by explaining it to the less good students, and if you're not quite such a good student, it really helps to have someone else to talk to. But still, they're resistant to that idea, and you have to work on that. My teaching evaluations have gone down since I use cases. Not by much, I'm still doing fine, but I've had students write comments like, this class was really fun, but Dr. Ribbens didn't do much. And I'm curious, have any of you had comments like that when you use cases? I know some of you use cases a lot.
That's such a terrible comment. We have a couple people who've raised their hand. Eric, Seeley, would you like to comment first by dialing *7?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
I actually have had that experience. We call them SRTs. My SRTs are still pretty good, but I get a lot of comments that show me students are uncomfortable a little bit with using cases. They don't, they're not being spoon-fed the information. So there's this disconnect between what they expect me to do, which is stand there and lecture, and what they really want me to do, which is, I think, provide an active learning environment. Now, I have found that my good comments have gotten better. So I do get some comments that say, wow, I really enjoyed this class, I learned a lot, or I never understood so-and-so before, and now I do.
And typically those comments are from your students who are more in the middle of the pack, right?
I would say very much so. You know, the students we kind of leave behind. I always feel like my B- students are those students that I don't know if I'm serving them well. You know, the really good students would do well regardless, I think. And the support students aren't always engaged. But it's this, 60% in the middle that I feel like I'm not always reaching.
Right. Right, and frankly, the good students are often kind of upset by this because they know how to make the lecture mode work.
Right. They know how to memorize. They've always been taught regurgitation is the way to go.
I see we have some other people who want to comment.
Julie, if you dial *6 to mute, and let's see, Deborah, if you'd like to dial *7 to comment.
I wanted to say I don't teach introductory biology very much, and the last time I taught it, I tried to do a lot of group work, and I didn't actually do any formal cases, which I use all the time in my science majors classes.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that they did not like it. They did not. I mean, the comments I got was, "Get rid of group work," and I don't think. Perhaps I did not, as you were saying, I did not educate them as to how they were supposed to be learning using these cases. Whereas the more advanced students they can just pick it up really easily. They understand, they can learn at a much higher level of taxonomy, whatever you want to call it. They can learn at a much higher level, and they get a lot out of the cases. I don't know how to use cases for the beginning biology students very well.
I do, if I can jump in just a little bit, I do think that a piece of our job is marketing. Marketing our major, you may have noticed my third goal there was get you excited about botany. Most of my students think that plants are something animals eat. And that's a little bit of a silly goal, but it's, they get the idea after a while. I do some marketing, for example, when they do my evaluations. I tell them, what you're doing is important. People are going to read it. If I've been a bad teacher, you need to say so. If I'm a good teacher, please don't just write, I don't like this, but explain why. And doing a bit of a marketing education thing I found really pays off for me. In the same sense with cases or group work or anything that you're doing that's not, for me, I also use clickers, and my students don't know why I'm using clickers or what the whole point is. Giving them some information up front does two things. First of all, it helps them to understand and accept it and gives them a much more positive attitude toward it if they think there's a good reason why. And secondly, they really appreciate being treated like adults. And you and I know they're not quite adults yet, but they think they are, and they deserve to be treated with respect and made to feel participants in the process, not just victims. Sorry, anybody else have a comment?
Eric, Cindy Miller's raised her hand. Cindy, if you'd like to dial *7 to share your question or comment.
Yes, I find that the first case was sort of like the first pancake. You kind of have to use that case to teach them how to get past that expectation that either the expectation that they're really good at memorizing and know how to do lecture, or for the lower students that they actually can do this.
Mm-hmm.
And in the cases that I use carry a high point value, so I expect a lot from them.
Mm-hmm.
They often don't deliver on that first case, but by the time you get through the first one, and you've, as you said, marketed it and the process, by the time you get the second case, then we've got something going for us. And since I teach a whole sequence, I usually have these students for the whole year.
And I would be personally, I would be very specific. One of my goals for you is I want you to start to continue to develop your ability to think like a scientist, because you're here because you're interested in science. And these cases are going to help you do that. And then we just sort of talk about, a little bit of horn tooting, I guess, is not a half bad idea. Other comments?
Kevin Mimi, would you like to dial *7 to share your comments?
Hello?
Hi. You're on.
Hi. So, one thing, my evaluations have definitely gone down the more cases I use. And actually, one of the frustrations that I get is the students are very aware of content, and they see they're getting less content. And for many of them, that's their major frustration. They don't. It's actually only later when you meet them 2 years down the road in the street that they actually appreciate it. So maybe 2 years down the road, which is too late for your class evaluations, of course.
Well, of course, that's the problem with all of education. If you're a tough prof, students aren't going to appreciate it until later. But I would say, Kevin, what you need to do is tell them. You may feel that you're learning less content, but there is good educational research that shows 6 months from now, you're going to have a better, deeper understanding of this subject than you would in a conventional lecture. And just go ahead and tell them that.
And that's what I try and do. When you're talking to them while you're actually going around and they're doing the cases. So the other thing you're talking about I definitely can relate to the better students sitting there finding it too easy in their group. And actually, the way I try and get around that is I try and persuade them. And in fact, actually by teaching, putting them in a teaching role, they actually learn a lot more about what they understand and how much they understand.
Yep.
And so once they buy into that they actually are now a teacher, not a learner, or they are learners, but they're actually learning by teaching. And actually the better students, they really do buy into that quite quickly.
Yep.
And you see that those groups become very good because you got one guy or woman who is there who is actually leading and being a mentor to their peers, and it's great when you see that click like that. So anyway, that's I guess all I had to comment on.
Okay, I see some other people want to comment, and yes, I'm seeing some others have questions for me, and I want to hear what people have to say right now, but I'll try to respond to some of them. Hello?
I'm sorry, Eric. Camille would like to know, what are your exams like? Are they many cases?
I guess you could say, first of all, exams are hard, and I don't know that I'm really good at them. I tend to write short answer questions, and I tend to write questions that are designed to see if they can figure out something from it. For example, on my last exam, I had a question. Your brother's got a fungal infection on his foot, and he's taking antibiotics to try to get rid of it. Why isn't that a good idea? And I want my students to recognize, hey, antibiotics are designed for working against bacteria. Fungus are something totally different. Now, that's a pretty basic point that I'm teaching a non-majors class here, and even getting across that idea is a real challenge. So my exams tend to be along that nature, and part of the situation here, too, is I would say exams are not necessarily the best way to assess some of the things that you want them to get as outcomes. And some of it may be a lot more informal, just walking around and asking groups and saying, well, keep thinking. Students can respond to feedback other than just an exam.
Great. I just want to comment, you guys are amazing with your participation. We are flooded with awesome questions. And we haven't been able to accommodate each question that has appeared in the duration of this call. And we wanted to let you know that there will be a discussion forum after the fact where we can continue this extremely lively dialogue and respond to any of your questions that haven't been responded to in the duration of this event. We're just thrilled with how many questions you guys have and trying to do the best we can to keep up with it. There's a question here, Eric, that I really like. Ruth Ann wanted to know if any of the participants in this webinar have students write and share their cases. I thought that was an interesting question.
Write and share their cases? What do you mean by that?
Whether or not students are writing the cases.
Oh, whether students... Boy, that's an interesting question. Ruth Ann, can you comment on that? I see you got your hand raised.
R7.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. I teach microbiology, and I do a little tiny bit of case stuff in the lab, but I really buy into the whole philosophy of case studies. But in an attempt to sort of address the issues related to students that don't like the group work, or the instructor giving the case and saying, well, here's the breaking the group and I'll do this together or whatever. I'm thinking that there might be some benefit to like doing the deal where you pair up students, and the students actually, you give the students, these are the instructional goals that we're trying to, this is the content that we want to try and cover, but then have the students write cases for each other. So, and it's more of a written assignment to start with than it is
That's an interesting idea.
Group thing. And I'm just curious if anybody does anything like that, and if so, is it successful?
Yeah, I haven't done that exactly, but I have had students turn in written assignments, and then I turn right around and give it to another student and ask them to comment on it and evaluate it. And when I grade their comments as heavily as the case, they start to take it more seriously. But again, a lot of it is... Yep, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, one of the issues that I have is, the huge cohort of my classes are pre-allied health students, and there's a lot of pressure, and they got to get grades and whatever. And so, there's a big, giant black market for course materials out there, and so if I do, a case study or something, then it gets passed to subsequent generations, and I have to write new ones every quarter. And I'm thinking, if I had the students writing the cases, then that would get rid of the black market, right? For the course materials, because they would be different every time.
It's not an easy solution. Let me just jump in a little bit and say, in regard to this discussion and things, first of all, I think we're going to hear pretty soon about the IBT discussion board. That's a great place to deal with stuff. Secondly, I'm happy to answer email follow-up questions, stuff like that. In fact, if you want me to come and do a workshop, ask and we'll see if we can work something like that out. And some of the things that people are asking about are certainly suitable topics for other webinars, like how to handle a large class, what do I do with clickers, or how to teach clickers in cases, or assessing cases, stuff like that. Sherry, do you have anything you want to say about that?
Absolutely. I second that there's lots of opportunity for us to continue this very dynamic dialogue. And within this webinar series, we're doing it because we want it to be useful and helpful to you. So the types of questions that you've been asking today, if there's certain topics in particular that you would really like to share expertise or to have a discussion with others in the community about how they address these issues, just send us those notes and ideas, and we would be happy to facilitate putting the webinar on so that you have the opportunity to get that development that you need. And Susan's going to elaborate in much greater detail about the IBP discussion boards and show you how to access them, and we'll be following up with emails with the link. So all of that will be taken care of, and we'll go into additional detail in just a few minutes.
Okay. Well, I've pretty much covered what I was hoping to get through today, and so if we want to go do more comments, that's fine, or if Susan, you want to jump in now?
Yeah, I think we could maybe even, one question that maybe we can even address pretty quickly right now, Eric, is do you assign groups at the beginning of the course? I think that was one that I saw. A couple people had some questions about the
yeah, how to handle things like that. It depends entirely upon the structure of your course and the nature of it. I've done cases with very small classes of, say, 15 students, and that I tend to make more formal groups. With my big class right now with 110 students, I tend to do a lot of, okay, turn to your neighbor and think about this problem. The two of you have got to agree on a common answer, and then use your clickers to put the answer in. So whoever's nearby you, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a great way to do it, especially with a large group. We're getting some other questions, too, as you can probably see, Eric. We can all see the chat questions, the presenters. Yep. Questions about, how do you even get started? So what would be one piece of advice to somebody? I know many of you have used many cases, but there are other folks on the webinar who haven't yet ventured into this territory. A piece of advice to give them, and I know also we're going to be able to provide them with a list of resources for finding good cases as well. Maybe you can share one
Sure.
nugget of advice for someone who's just getting started.
First of all, don't try to solve the world overnight. I had a spectacular failure when I first thought I was going to do this, so I completely restructured my class, so it was nothing but cases, and it didn't work. I am now teaching a non-majors class in which we are basically doing nothing but cases, but I've had to work my way into it. So if you're interested in doing cases, and I hope you are, and I encourage you to, just go ahead and start trying them, work with them, see where you go. In terms of finding cases, the overwhelming resource that many people have mentioned when I sent out that email before, and the one that I know of the most, is the Buffalo Case Collection. It's not perfect, but there are a large number of cases there. Those of you who use bigger classes, they're starting to get an increasing number of cases that are PowerPoints built right in. Some of you, for example, I know use my chemical Eric case about hormones, and we just recently released one version of that uses PowerPoint. And remember, a case is nothing more than a story with a problem. So you don't have to necessarily use a formal case. As you get more and more comfortable with this, you'll start to see ideas for things popping up all over the place.
Thanks, Eric. Hopefully that's helpful to you all. So I'm going to go ahead and jump to talking about the discussion boards, because I see those as a place that we can continue many of these discussions. And as Eric said, actually, he'll actually be able to follow up individually with many of you. But,
yeah,
so
I'm happy to respond to any individual email, but also if you use this IBP discussion board, I promise that I will do my best to get in and look at it regularly.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So IBP discussion board, let me show you. IBP, again, is the Introductory Biology Project, which is supported by NSF. And there's on this main web page, and we'll send you the link to it. You see in the upper right-hand corner a link to discussion. And the discussions, we right now are moderating the discussions, and there's a lot more in there than you see right here. But what's really great about it is the opportunity to interact with each other on a more one-to-one basis. So when you go to the discussion board, we'll send you the link. You can enter a new topic. You can respond to a previously posted topic. And it's really just a great way for you all to interact. Sherry, did you want to add anything about the discussion boards there?
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned before, there's an extremely lively discussion on the chat today. So we're going to extract this file that has all the data that's been collected through your participation and post the questions and responses to the discussion board so that if you're curious, I know you haven't been able to see the chat in duration of the webinar. If you're curious how other people answered the questions that you've responded to, we'll aggregate all of those answers. We'll remove your names in case there's anything that you're not comfortable with. In addition, we'll post the questions that didn't get answered in the duration of this call today. So Eric will be checking in to provide answers for many of the things that we didn't get to. And one more thing is just a reminder that the archive file of this event will be available on the discussion boards as well, no charge for viewing. So if there's anything that you wanted to listen to again within the call today, if you had to leave early or come late, then you'll be able to catch up on what you've missed.
My goal in this is to help you all use cases more and more effectively. So anything that I can do to help you with that, I'm happy to do. Just ask.
I'd just like to second using the discussion boards because I think many of us would genuinely benefit from being able to see the questions that others ask. You've all had a great variety of questions, and that information is of value to the whole community. So if you don't mind sharing them in a public forum, it's really great so that others can learn from it as well.
And those of you who said that you use cases a lot, the 80% and so forth, please get on the IBP board and describe more about what you do and what your experiences are, because you've got some information the rest of us would really benefit from.
That's a great point. I think often when people sign up for these things, we're getting such a variety of experiences here today, which is wonderful because you can learn from one another really nicely. So we talked about the IBC discussion boards, and like I said, don't worry, we'll send you a link to the board itself. We'll send you the URL. We wanted to tell you a few other things about this webinar series, and one of which is that we'll be able to provide people who participate in 6 or more of these events with a letter and a certificate from NABT, AIBS, and UCMP, which will recognize your investment, basically, in improving your teaching and learning. And we want to also find out how useful and valuable that is to you, because we don't want to do it unless it's going to benefit you, and find out what other ways we can help support and recognize your efforts within your institution or from people higher up. So we do want to hear back from you about that. Sherry, would you tell people about the joint membership?
Sure. Just quickly, NABT and AIBS have partnered. NABT is the publisher of American Biology Teacher, and AIBS is the publisher of Bioscience, to offer a joint membership class at an extremely reduced rate to help support these initiatives. We understand that many of you have dual roles as both researchers and educators and would have great added value from being able to get a subscription to both journals. So for the wonderful price of $100, you'll get electronic access only to both of those journals. We're testing that out to see if it's something that the education community would find useful. If you're interested, the URL is joinaibsnabt.org. Again, that URL will be available in the follow-up email. We hope that's a helpful service for you. And then, as I iterated before, the more webinars, this platform and this tool we're finding it to be a very valuable one, and we want to make it ever more valuable to you guys as members of this community. All of this was inspired by some sessions we had at NABT in Colorado this fall, where we just hosted some sessions that enabled educators to come together, sit around a table, and talk about the challenges they face as educators and start to hash out some solutions to those problems as a community. And we want to help. We're looking for ways to continue that kind of momentum and create opportunities for you guys to build from each other's knowledge. And anything we can do to help with those interactions and to help support you, we're very excited to do. So please don't hesitate to let us know what is valuable and what we can do better. Susan?
Sure. And at the end of this webinar, you're going to see a screen pop up that'll ask you to provide some more feedback on the webinar itself. And we really value your feedback. It's what helped bring this webinar to you from your peers and colleagues, and what will help shape the next ones, as Sherry just said. So really appreciate your participation. We have a few more minutes here. Sherry?
Yeah, if we have a few more minutes. If there's anyone who has questions that they'd like to ask of Eric while we're still on the phone, please feel free to raise your hand or put them in the chat, and we'd be happy to help you moderate them. Okay. Altagracia, if you'd like to go ahead and unmute your phone by dialing *7. Altagracia is dialing in from the Dominican Republic today, which I thought was really neat.
I want to go there.
Can we come visit you? *7. So on your Skype window, you'll want to dial the little keypad. There's 9 little squares together. Okay.
Deborah, you asked how many I use. Typically about 12. Typically about a third to half of my class is cases. I'm teaching an introductory non-majors class right now, and about 80% of that is cases.
Eric, we did have one other question. I'm curious to know, maybe we can provide some people with references. Elaine had asked in the chat earlier for references which show the effectiveness of cases. So maybe some research results that will provide support, kind of a backbone to support the use of cases. Do you have resources we could share with them afterwards?
First of all, I would suggest that people browse through the NSF case collection website. There's a lot of information there. Secondly, I will try to put together a summary document to some of the stuff that I've heard or learned and post it to the IBT board.
Great. I think Altagracia is having a little trouble dialing in. So Monica, would you like to ask your question by dialing *7?
Yes, this is not really about cases, but as I read up on your curriculum and on your syllabus, and you mentioned about clickers, I'm undergoing right now a study of trying to introduce the use of clickers in my school. And now our groups are small groups, 20 to 25 students, and from what I've read and I noticed on your comments, they have greater benefits in big classes. In your experience, would it be also helpful and Will it promote student achievement if they're used in smaller classes?
I'd love to do another webinar just about clickers. I'm a big fan of them. I use them in a class of 12 students.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Star 6 to mute again. Alyssa, would you like to ask your question now by dialing star 7?
Yes, Rosemary, we'll get that NSF website posted.
Yeah. My question was, I know you talked about getting the students involved in teaching them how to use the cases, but how do you handle students who they're really insistent, they want you to provide a full content lecture before you even discuss a case with them?
Certainly, part of this doing cases is you're going to fail. And you're going to have I've had a post before, I didn't say anything about it, but I've had a student who told me, I really don't like these cases. They make me think, and I'm better at memorizing facts. And, of course, I'm seeing that as, wow, I've succeeded. And she's seeing it as, no, I don't like you. Mm-hmm. Sometimes when you do cases, students don't come up with what you expect. There's a great case about coelacanths, and I've used that and ended with saying, what would you do if you were a student now studying this? And I'm expecting them to come up with, well, I'd like to know more about what they do in the caves or whatever. And I had a group of students say, we'd go out and try to catch them because if we did, we'd be like bad fishing dudes. You're going to fail, And with students who expect a more traditional format, I guess, first of all, I would try using reason and just say, hey, I think that you're going to learn more and learn more effectively and especially learn how to integrate. Okay. And if they won't buy that, then you just tell them, suck up and deal with it, dude.
Yeah, because I just find that some of them, they want the full lecture on how everything works, and then they want the case afterwards.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, then that defeats the purpose.
Right, and you can also say, hey, part of what we're doing here is, this is life. Life is doing things before you know all the data. Mm-hmm. And if you tell stories about scientists and what they do, we had a webinar a month or so ago about a great website called Understanding Science Berkeley, and have them look at that and see that the model of how scientists work is not a nice, precise, linear model. We sort of wander around all over the place.
Okay. Thank you.
You bet.
Let's see. We have an additional question from Anne Marie. Anne Marie,
yeah, hi. I was just pressing star 7. My question is about setting expectations for students. So if we know, and I'm really interested to hear what you have to say about this, Dr. Ribbens, or anybody else who's used cases. We know we're going to use cases. We know there's uncertainty. We know there's a purpose behind them. To what extent, how successful are you with setting expectations, either initially or throughout the course, about what students can expect from why you're doing this? What's the purpose?
Sure. First of all, it's like any other piece of your course. You start out smaller and simpler, and you have the students see how it works. So the first couple of cases I pick are deliberately pretty easy cases, and I tell them why we're doing it and what they should be getting out of it. And when they're nervous about what happens, I reassure them, this is part of the way it works, and we'll get there. People really do well with positive feedback. So you have them do a case, and then you tell them, I'm really impressed. You guys took this problem, and you solved it. This is exactly what I want. It makes them feel good, and then they're more willing to do it again. So the expectations in my class sort of shift and build as we get along, and they learn what I'm expecting and what I'm doing, and I also start out simpler.
Eric, I like this question from Sean Walker. How do you find that student misconceptions get in the way of having a successful case experience?
I think the biggest one is students who think that biology is facts. And you AP biology high school teachers give us a lot of grief because our students come out of there thinking, I understand you have to cram, but they think that everything should be reduced to flashcards. And I kind of deliberately go the other point. I tell them, I don't care about a fact. You can look it up. What I care about is the concept. So, for example, I don't care if you know the 16 essential nutrients for plants, but I do care if you have some idea about how plants pick them up and get them into the roots.
Well,
Stuff like that.
Yeah, I think, Eric, this is Susan, I think that those AP teachers are being driven by the exam, and luckily the exam is seems to change. So that's good news, I think, for everybody involved.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about no student pushed ahead, but student misconceptions are hard. And a piece of it, I think, is pick a relatively easy case, tell them why you're doing it, praise the heck out of them for how they did such a good job, even if they didn't really. And then the next piece of it, and we really should have a separate webinar just about this, is the assessment. Show them that being able to solve a case successfully will help them get a better grade on whatever you do for assessment.
Great. There's a great question in the chat. How can case studies be used in web-based classes?
You know, we have one person on this group who told me that she does asynchronous cases online, and I would love to know more about that. I've never really taught an online class. I can imagine cases as being potentially really powerful, but I am the last person to ask that question about. I'm sorry.
If the person who has that experience is available to talk about it, we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, it looks like it's Keely. Keely, you want to join in?
Dial *7, Keely, to unmute.
I'm here.
Enlighten us all.
I could talk for hours on this, but just briefly, I was kind of forced. I see a lot of our institution taking our courses and kind of expecting us to deliver them online as well. I had transitioned a course, an environmental science course, which I think actually lends itself very well to case study learning, to an online format. I actually ended up having them do quizzes and tests based on the content that was really separate from the second part of the course, which was giving them these cases or these problems and having them discuss it through our discussion board, post their original responses, and then evaluate the responses of others in the course. Now, it didn't go very well at first, but eventually, over the 3 years I've done it, it's actually really made them feel more engaged in the online course. They feel like they know their team. I have them in permanent teams, so they feel like they're in a course of 6 or 7 students. But it's been a real learning experience for me. It did not go smoothly at first.
Kaylee, would you do us all a favor? Sit down and more formally type out some of your thoughts at some point and post them to the IVP discussion board.
I'd be glad to do that.
And by the way, I see somebody who said here that it's hard to find a case at the right level. Kate Cooper, you're absolutely right. It is hard to find cases. And one of the things that we probably also should talk about is no one expects you to use a case exactly as it is. Feel free to modify it up or down, make it harder or easier, whatever works for you. And part of that is just like using a lecture from somebody else. You're going to tailor it to your own material.
Well, it's 3:29, Eric, and it's Friday afternoon, so let's.
And I have to go teach a case.
I think it's just wonderful that we've had this great discussion today, and we're really looking forward to the conversation continuing by future webinars and the IVP discussion board. Susan or Eric, do you have any other wrap-up comments?
I really appreciate the opportunity to do this, and you've all been a very important part of it. Thank you for your participation.
Yes, indeed. Thanks so much, everybody, for coming out, and we look forward to your feedback, and we look forward to continuing the conversation with you all.
All right. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Bye-bye.